This lesson is over parallel and perpendicular lines. There are two goals in this lesson. The first one is to relate slope to parallel and perpendicular lines, and the second is to write equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. The standard is geometric properties using equations number 5. The essential understanding is that you can determine whether two lines are parallel or perpendicular by comparing their slopes. When two lines are parallel, their slopes are the same. If two non-vertical lines are parallel, then their slopes are equal. If the slopes of two distinct non-vertical lines are equal, then the lines are parallel, which is basically saying the same thing. Any two vertical lines or horizontal lines are parallel. This problem is asking us if lines 1 and 2 are parallel. So let's take a look at line 1, which is this line right here, and calculate the slope. Then we're going to look at line 2 and calculate the slope. Remember, the slopes must be exactly the same, and if they are, then they're parallel. If they're not the same, they're not parallel. So let's start out with line 1. We notice both of the lines are negative because they are going down to the right. So line 1, the y values, the difference between 5 and 4 is 9 spaces. And remember that we know the slope is negative. And the difference in the x values is 2 to negative 1, and that's 3. So the slope on that is negative 9/3 or negative 3. Now look at line 2. The difference in, first of all, we know the slope is negative, but the difference in the y values is 7, and the difference in the x values is 2. Since negative 9/3 is not equal to negative 7/2, we know that those two lines are not parallel. Here's your first practice problem. Look at those two lines, line 1 and line 2, and calculate the slopes and decide whether or not those two lines are parallel. This question says line D passes through points 6,4 and 9,8. Line E is parallel to line D. What is the slope of line E? Well, all we have to do is find the slope of line D to find the slope of line E. So we are going to mark this one as x sub 1, y sub 1, x sub 2, and y sub 2. So we're going to start with our y values because that is our numerator, and we're going to do 4 minus 8, and on the x values we're going to do 6 minus 9. 4 minus 8 is negative 4. 6 minus 9 is negative 3. When dividing two negatives, it becomes a positive. So the slope of line D is 4/3, which automatically makes the slope of line E 4/3. Practice problem 2. Line M passes through points 3,17 and 8,8. Line N is parallel to line M. What is the slope of line N? Perpendicular lines. If two non-vertical lines are perpendicular, then the product of their slopes is negative 1. If the slopes of any two lines have a product of negative 1, then the lines are perpendicular. Any horizontal line and a vertical line are perpendicular. So what does that mean when the product of their slopes is negative 1? It just means that perpendicular slopes are inverse and opposite signs. Well, what does that mean? If I have a slope of 2/3, the slope of a line that is perpendicular is inverse. Inverse means I swap places. And opposite signs, the opposite of a positive is a negative. So a line perpendicular to a line with a slope of 2/3, line perpendicular would have a slope of -3/2. Here we have two lines, line 1, line 2, and the question is, are these lines perpendicular? So once again, we need to calculate the slope of each line to find out if they are perpendicular. So let's start with line 1. We know that the line is negative, the slope of the line is negative because it's going down to the right. So we're going to mark that slope negative. So let's look at the difference in the y values. 2 to -4 is 6 spaces, and -4 to 0 is 4 spaces. Now I'm not going to worry about reducing this. All I want to know is, are these lines perpendicular? So now let's look at line 2. We know that this is a positive slope, and the difference in the x values, or I'm sorry, in the y values, from 3 to -3 is 6, and from 4 to -5 is 9. Those slopes are not inverse opposite, so those lines are not perpendicular. Practice problem 3. Are lines L1 and L2 perpendicular? Calculate their slopes to find out. Line P passes through points 1, 5 and 9, 10. Line Q is perpendicular to P. What is the slope of line Q? Well, let's find the slope of line P and then invert and make it opposite sign and find out the slope of a perpendicular line. So let's start with our y values. We're going to do 10 minus 5 and 9 minus 1. So that gives us 5/8. All right, so when we invert this, we get 8/5, and the opposite sign, the opposite of a positive, is a negative. So the slope of line Q is -8/5. Practice problem 4. Line Q passes through points 5, 1 and 7, 10. Line R is perpendicular to Q. What is the slope of line R? Now we're going to look at how to write equations of parallel and perpendicular lines. The equation for line R can be written as y equals 2x plus 7. Line S includes the point 7, 6 and is parallel to line R. What is the equation of line S? So, right now, because these lines are parallel, I know that the slope is 2x. They give us a point, they give us an x value and a y value. So to solve this, we are going to replace y with 6, 2 instead of x, we're going to make 7, and the only thing we have to find is the y-intercept, or b. So we're just going to solve for b. So 6 equals 14 plus b. Subtract 14 from both sides. b equals -8. So to rewrite that equation, we just take y equals 2x minus 8. That gives us the equation of the line parallel to y equals 2x plus 7 and goes through the point 7, 6. Practice problem number 5. The equation for line S can be written as y equals negative 1/2 x plus 7. Line T is parallel to line S and passes through point negative 3, 1. What is the equation of line T? If you're not sure how to do this, go back to my previous problem and watch how I do it again. The equation of line G is y equals negative 1/3 x plus 6. Line H, which is perpendicular to line G, includes the point negative 3, negative 10. What is the equation of line H? First of all, remember that perpendicular slopes are inverse and opposite sign. So they also give me an x value and a y value. I'm going to start with y. The value for y was negative 10. I'm going to invert and change the sign of the slope. That makes it a positive 3 over 1. X is negative 3 plus b. We need to solve for the y-intercept. I have negative 10 equals 3 times negative 3 is negative 9 plus b. Add 9 to both sides. That gives me b equals negative 1. So my new equation is y equals 3x minus 1. Practice problem 6. The equation for line V can be written as y equals 3x minus 3. Line W, which is perpendicular to line V, includes the point 8, negative 3. What is the equation of line W? Again, go back and look at the previous problem and how I do it if you're not sure how to do it. Then you're going to see problems where they give us two lines, points for two lines, and they want to know if the lines are parallel or perpendicular or neither. So let's start with this first line. I'm going to take 8 minus 1 over 8 minus 5, and I get 7 over 3. I look at the next line, and let's include 12, and I'm going to take 12 minus 3 over 2 minus 4. 12 minus 3 is 9. 2 minus 4 is negative 2. And because the numbers have nothing to do with each other, we know that those lines are neither parallel or perpendicular. And your final problem says line G passes through the points 5, 10 and 1, 1. Line H passes through points 9, 10 and 5, 1. Are line G and line H parallel, perpendicular, or neither? Now I know this lesson kind of included a lot of information. Hopefully that you at least sort of get it. If you don't get it at all, start over at the beginning and watch the video again. There are 2 assignments that go with this lesson, and hopefully when you're done with the assignments, you'll be so good you can teach this. And that's the end of this lesson.